Good day, everyone. This is episode 40 with Remi, and it's going to be a highlight of what's going on in Saudi Arabia for the month of January year 2022. In this episode, I'm going to highlight what's going on. There are a few points I would like to discuss or highlight and give you an idea about what's going on in Saudi Arabia, especially of the events that were happening in this month, January of 2022. The first point I'm going to talk about is the assassination attempts that was happening by the Saudi regime towards some Saudi activists who lives overseas. And the second point is going to be what's going on in Jeddah, the displacement that is Muhammad Salman is trying to do to displace the South Jeddah residents from their own homes to achieve, of course, his unrealistic vision 2030. The third point is going to be about how the Saudi regime in the season of Riyadh, which is all about entertainment that will last for like 6 months, is trying to protect the offenders of the sexual harassment and also imprisoning and uh, arresting those who are victimized of these sexual harassment crimes. And the last point that I would like to highlight is about what's going on, the continuous attack in Yemen. And also, there were some rumors, some news about some of the House of Saud members are being tortured, especially Mohammed bin Naif, who's supposed to be the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, but he was stripped away from that position about 4 or 5 years ago. Anyway, okay, the first point, which is about what has happened in the last 6 weeks, uh, the Saudi regime is trying or still trying to assassinate and also try to silence those who are speaking out, who lives overseas, those political or human rights activists living overseas. And they were like, there was one clear attempt that happened in London, UK, before the Christmas of last year. And that person was a previous legal advisor who lived in Saudi Arabia, or he's from Saudi Arabia basically, but he lives now in London, UK, and he was attacked brutally by a group of people. And he pointed out that those who attacked them or those who attacked him, uh, some of them were from the Saudi government itself or the Saudi regime itself, and some of them from within the Saudi opposition who lives in London, which is very annoying because those people, if it was true, they are they are Islamist and very extreme Islamist, which is very dangerous to the country itself of Britain. And the other case that happened also was a try of tracking down another lawyer who lives in who lives in Auckland City in New Zealand. The Saudi regime was trying to track him by putting a camera that belongs to a few people who visited him, or sorry, who claim that they are friends and they are going to stay in his apartment where he lives. But then they put a camera, and then that camera was found by that lawyer. His name is Isaac Al Jizani, and he received a message before he found that camera, and that message says to him that we are watching you and we are going to put you down. So what Isaac did is he called immediately the New Zealand police about that incident. And that lawyer who was about to be murdered in London before the Christmas of last year, his name is Muhammad Al Qahtani. And Humanity First, Humanity is the Solution Center, has talked about this incident in their Twitter account. So what the message what message the Saudi regime is trying to deliver, not only to the Saudi activists who lives overseas, or even uh, to the international community or to the human rights organizations, is that uh, we are going to hunt down everyone who speaks out about the regime, about the regime's human rights violations, and also they are going to breach the international law because they think they have the money that can silence everyone who wants to speak out, not necessarily from the Saudi activists, but also those organizations, human rights organizations, or even the international community who wants to talk about what's going on in Saudi Arabia, the human rights violations, women's rights violations, also those who are not feeling safe, even in the countries of supposed to be having safe for them, like UK, Canada, US, Australia, New Zealand, and those countries. And that message is because the Saudi regime has money, so they can do whatever they want and they can breach the international laws. That's the message that the Saudi regime wants to deliver to those human rights organizations and also to the foreign governments and the international community, which they have to be aware of those actions and really take seriously those incidents that happened to these cases, to these activists, and also the previous ones. Because the Saudi regime is not going to stop doing that. They will keep doing it until they get everyone of their citizens who lives overseas and speaks out silenced. And I personally experienced that because I received some phone calls, some text messages in the past few years, and all of them were from the Saudi regime. And those who called me, they turned out to be students and they are under the Saudi regime scholarships. So they called me to try to find out where I am, what do I do, how do I live, which area, which city, which suburbs I live in Australia, which was really dangerous to me. But then I had to ignore them, and then they ignored me. And then they keep doing it because one tries, the other, if he or she fails, then the next one comes after a few months or after a few weeks. It depends. And also, I used to receive some text messages telling me that you got some shipments, some stuff, you need to get them. So you have to click on the link, which I advise everyone who lives overseas from Saudi Arabia who is activist to be aware of those links, text messages, phone calls, because once you accept that, they most likely will try to find out where you are. So the second point is what's going on in Jeddah, which is about displacing the residents of people in South Jeddah. That's for the sake of MBS Unrealistic Vision 2030. And what's going on in South Jeddah is Mohammed Salman is trying to clear out all these neighbors. He said they are not planned; they are mass uh, neighbors, and they have to be cleared out. And that comes with a cost, and that cost is to displace the people who used to live there for many years. And he said that he got some projects he wants to make in that area. So displacing them is the only reason to do that. And the other thing is the Saudi regime, through its own media that controls the media in Saudi Arabia, they are trying to spread misleading information and untrue information that is those people who live in South Jeddah, they are criminals, they are drug dealers, they are drug addicts, they are people with previous records, and so on, which is somehow is not true because they are trying to tell the people in Saudi Arabia in other areas, and also to the international community and the human rights organization, that in that particular area, the South Jeddah area, all of the people who lives there, they are criminals, they are drug dealers, they are organized crimes members, and so on, which is doesn't make any sense at all. And it's not the reason to justify what you are doing to those people. Because if you want to make a change, then you have to talk to them, you have to be clear with them, you have to be honest with them, you have to compensate them fairly and put them in a much better place, not just displacing them and telling them that I have a project I want to do, which is really unrealistic, which is, everyone knows, I think it's the Vision 2030. And if we really look at that Vision 2030 since Muhammad Salman announced it, and take some examples of his projects that he's trying to do, for example, NEOM, he actually didn't do any single thing in that project in NEOM. He's paying a lot of money to promote about that project, but if you go to NEOM itself, you won't see anything that is being done so far. Until now, for like 3 months ago, I guess, one of the one of the one of the head of the project, he came out to the public and to the media and talked to the public. He said that we haven't done any single thing, we had it planned, we didn't do any plans to make any progress in NEOM project, which tells us that what's going on in South Jeddah is more far than what the people really think, that Muhammad Salman is trying to tell them that there is a project is going to happen. But in reality, based on the information I received, is that he wants to make Jeddah an unlivable place, because he wants to focus more on Riyadh, Neom, and other areas that he wants to develop. But Jeddah itself, no. It has a lot of conflicts, a lot of reasons why he wants to do that. Maybe one of them is because of the religious area, because Jeddah is considered also to the Muslims that it's the gate of the holy places. Because if you want to go to if you want to go to Mecca, because I'm from Jeddah, it's my hometown. If you want to go to Mecca to perform Hajj or Umrah, then you have to land in Jeddah first. So it's like a gate to Mecca. And then from Jeddah also you can take a train directly to Medina, which is up to the north. But then what's going on is something that you could say it's fishy by Muhammad Salman. And I agree that at some points, some of the info he said about what's going on in South Jeddah, that there are some crimes, some drugs, some stuff like that. I agree with that at some stage, but it's not complete. Like, not all of them are criminals. Not all of them are drug addicts. There are some, of course, but it's not the reason to justify displacing them is to tell them that because they are criminals or so on, which is unfair. And also, there was something happened that I have received, is that those people who live in South Jeddah, if they talked about that, if they speak out, if they talk to the media or to the social media to let everyone knows, especially those who live overseas or the international community or the human rights organizations, if they talk about what's going on in South Jeddah, they will end up getting arrested and then go to prison. And there is like a famous term that we used to say in Saudi Arabia, that you will go behind the sun. And this term means that if you talk about that, then you will go behind the sun. You will get arrested and you'll be imprisoned, and nobody will ever know what really is going on with you. Most likely, you might be killed just because you have the right to live where you want to live. You have the right to have your own home where you want it to be. And then you end up like that. And based on the article number 17 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it stated that everyone has the right to have their own homes where they want it to be, and no one has the right to harm them or to destroy them or try to displace them. But what's going on in Saudi Arabia is the opposite. The government is displacing those people who many of them have the right to live there, and of course they have the, the, the right to live there because they wanted to live there. And that's another issue that I really advise the citizens of Saudi Arabia, and also the residents of South Jeddah in particular, that they have to know that this is the rights, it's the human rights, it's one of the basics of human rights that they have, to live there and to have their own homes. And once they have this knowledge, they have the right to defend it peacefully, or, and I don't wish it, maybe by violence, but I hope that won't happen, and won't get to that point eventually. But they have the right to defend it. They have the right to live wherever they want to live. Okay. Third point, which is going to be about a really big problem that's going on in Saudi Arabia right now, because there is what is called the Riyadh season, which is all about fun and entertainment things. And what the Saudi regime is trying to do is to deliver a message to the international community, to the whole uh, travelers who likes to travel all over the world, that you are welcome to Saudi Arabia, by trying to cover up those sexual harassment cases that's increasing and happens every single day in Saudi Arabia, especially in those areas, in those places, the Riyadh season, Jeddah season, and so on. And what the Saudi regime is trying to do is to arrest anyone who talks about the sexual harassment they experienced, because they're victims and they recorded that by their own phones. And when they report it to the police, trying to get protection from them and help them out, assist them, they end up in prison, and they end up being charged of misusing their own phones because they're recording somebody else, and it's a breach of privacy, which is really doesn't make sense. And the punishment for that is 1 year in prison, and also maybe with a 500,000 Riyal Saudi, maybe about 200,000 US dollars, around that. That's unbelievable, because the Saudi regime is doing that to wants to lie to the world that we have freedom of entertainment. The country is safe, but in reality, it's not safe. There were like a lot of cases on social media. You can look it up and see how the victims are telling and sharing their experiences of being sexually harassed, mostly by male, and the victims are females. And the government said, sorry, the regime said, because sorry, we don't have a government, we have a regime. Anyway, the regime said, based on the anti-cyber crimes law, article number 3, point 4, that if you misuse your phone by recording somebody else, you will end up in prison for 1 year, or a fine of 500,000 Saudi riyals, or both. But in this case, people who are being sexually harassed, they have to record to prove to the government or to the regime, to the police, that they have been victimized of this crime. But the government, or sorry, the regime, is arresting them and protecting those criminals. And the other thing is, those international travelers, when they come over to Saudi Arabia to see those places, when they get in trouble, like for example, if they experience some sexual harassment crimes from the citizens of Saudi Arabia, especially from the males, and then they report it to the police will take action immediately and will hunt down those criminals and put them in jail. But when it happens to the citizens of that country, Saudi Arabia, the government, or sorry, the regime doesn't do anything. instead arresting them and protect those criminals. And that's of course crazy. It doesn't make sense. And that's what's been happening at least in the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And the funny thing, the very annoying thing, is that the chairman of the Entertainment Authority of Saudi Arabia, his name is Turki Al Sheikh. When the Riyadh season started in late October, he shared a tweet with the people with three emojis and a photo, and that photo is a statement from the national security spokesperson. And he said that anyone who records, or sorry, misused the phones by recording someone else, it's a breach of personal privacy, and that will lead that person who recorded to a prison of 1 year based on the law of anti-cyber crimes law, article number 3, which is doesn't make sense, because those people who records are actually victims of sexual harassment. And when they prove that to the police, they end up in prison for 1 year, or maybe 500,000 Saudi riyals. And those criminals, the sexual harassment offenders, they are still free, and nobody will stop them. And there was a short clip from Turki Ali Sheikh, I think from last year. He said that I think from the first season of Riyadh season, there was a short clip. He was talking to other Saudi men, saying them, "What are you doing? Are you come here to annoy some women, or flirting some women?" But actually, what he meant, that he knows that those people, or some of them, or maybe most of them, they come to Riyadh season to sexual harassing women, and that's what they do. They think it's flirting, but then actually it's actually annoying and distracting women's time in that area, which is sexual harassment crimes is being happening by those people in that time in that area. And Turki Al Sheikh, the chairman and the Saudi court advisor, is allowing that, is defending those criminals and putting those victims in prison, just for the sake that we have freedom of entertainment. And the world travelers, international travelers, come over to Saudi Arabia and enjoy entertainment in Saudi Arabia, which some of them really want to visit Saudi Arabia because they believe that there are history, culture, a lot of things, food, a lot of things that they haven't seen elsewhere, but in Saudi Arabia. Of course, Saudi Arabia has a long history, not uh, well, there is some confusion about the word Saudi Arabia and the land itself. The land itself was there before it was called Saudi Arabia. Anyway, that area has a history. So those people want to come, but then they want to guarantee safety. And the best way for Saudi regime to guarantee those people safety is to arrest the victims of sexual harassment, which most of them are women, and let the criminals of sexual harassment free. But once that happened to those international travelers, the government, also the regime, will take action immediately. That's hypocrisy. Anyway, that's hypocrisy, and people know where's the source of hypocrisy come from. Okay, now we go to the last point that I would like to highlight, which is what's going on in Yemen, the attack in Yemen, and also some news and rumors about torture of some members of the Saudi House. What's going on in Yemen is really, really sad and really shame for all humanity, because it's been more than 7 years now since the war was started in Yemen by the Saudi regime and its alliance. They claimed that because of the Houthi is taken over the Yemen, now we have to remove the Houthi, but then they destroyed Yemen. Even though the Houthi is part of the destruction to Yemen, and also to displacing the citizens of Yemen. But what's going on until now is it doesn't seem like there is a clear way out of this war. Instead, the Saudi regime is continuing to destroy Yemen after all of these 7 years. And what made me really sad is the citizens of Saudi Arabia itself, which is playing a big part of the war of this war. The citizens are still silent, and you could say that you can't blame them because what's going on in Saudi Arabia itself and to those people, they can't solve those issues like the displacement, not only in South Jeddah but also in some areas, especially close to Neom, the human rights violations, the arrests, the continuous arrest of men and women because of their freedom of expression, because of their opinions and criticism against the Saudi regime. They all end up in prison, but then nobody talks about them. Nobody actually defends them. So, how they can do something to the war in Yemen, which some of them now, I believe that most of them now believe that what's going on in Yemen is really inhumane and against humanity. But what I really hope is that the current generation and the previous generations who are still alive is to educate, to raise awareness about human rights, about what's going on by the Saudi regime when it comes to human rights, women's rights, political rights, what's going on to the neighbor countries like Yemen. It's all because of the Saudi regime that violates humanity itself. So I hope the current generations, the previous generations, to raise awareness to the next generations, their kids, children, daughters, boys, and so on, to make them believe that they are human beings after all, and they have human rights, and they have to defend them, and then they can make a change when they grow up. Otherwise, they will suffer what the current generations and the previous generations have suffered and still suffering. And and they can defend by the way, and they could defend themselves by peace, not necessarily by violence. But then if the regime wants to use violence, then they have to protect themselves and still defend themselves peacefully until they make a change. I believe it's somehow pretty hard for the current generations and the previous generations to make a change peacefully or even by violence. But I believe the next generations will make the change that has been waited for a long time. And the other part of this point is the rumors that we have heard from the news about some of the House of Saud members are being tortured, and there was a name in particular mentioned and who's been victimized of this torturing, which is his name is Muhammad bin Naif. He used to be the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, and supposed to be the next in line for the kingship. But then there was a coup a few years ago happened to him by Muhammad Salman, and that's why he's been silenced, disappeared until now. And the latest reports that we have heard about him is being put in upside down and being tortured. And the Saudi citizens and also the international community, the human rights organizations, they have to be aware of what's going on within the Saudi regime or the House of Saud, because they're ruling the country. And of course, they have some issues because what Muhammad Salman is doing to the people is also doing the same thing with different things, with different ways with his family members. And he's trying to put everyone under his arms and ensure that nobody will go against him, especially if he becomes a king. And the Saudi citizens, the international community, and also the human rights organizations, they have to look closely of what's going on within the House of Saud family, because what's going on is going to affect the situation not only in Saudi Arabia but also in the area. And Muhammad Salman at the same time is trying to build his image again after what he has done to Khashoggi assassination crime. But I think everyone, especially the international community, the foreign governments, the human rights organizations, they don't want him anymore unless if he makes real reforms in Saudi Arabia, especially for the people, and especially when it comes for human rights, women rights, and political rights. Because I assume that all of the human rights organizations, the foreign governments, and the international community, they already know that there is no such thing that is called political rights. People, they don't have any idea about politics. They don't have any idea about uh, making a party or joining a political party. They don't have any idea about human rights, especially when it comes to freedom of expression. They don't have any idea about that. Imagine that if you say you have the right to express your opinion, they will look at you and they will stare at you and they will say, "Are you serious? You want to make this country in trouble?" And they have really bad idea about what it means to be uh, a person who is expressing their views. They don't have any idea about that. And I assume that the international community, the human rights organizations, and the foreign governments, many people outside in other countries, they already know what's going on in Saudi Arabia when it comes to human rights. So there are a lot of things that the citizens of Saudi Arabia they don't know, especially when it comes again to human rights and political rights, or even women rights and also children rights. And that's the role that all Saudi activists who lives overseas they have to play to make the change, at least for the next generations in Saudi Arabia, by raise awareness about human rights, raise awareness about political rights. So the people, when they have this knowledge, they can defend themselves. They can have that idea that tells them that that's their rights, that's their basic human rights. So they have to defend it themselves, either by peace, which I recommend, and it could lead to violation or to violence by the government or by the regime, which I don't recommend. But the people have to protect themselves at all times and also have to protect their own rights, which is human rights. And also, they have to be aware of what's going on within the House of Saud family because it will affect them. It will put them either in danger as citizens, as country, or in a safe way if Muhammad Salman or the House of Saud was removed and came by the public. So the people they have to be ready, they have to be acknowledged, they have to be aware of those human rights and political rights, women rights, and also the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.